And hello to all of you out there in podcast world. This is the Front Row Network. I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and we're here once again for Zone-i-Sodes, our, as Scott likes me to put it, trek through the history of the Twilight Zone. And we are discussing today episode 54, The Odyssey of Flight 33, which aired on CBS February 24th, 1961. And once again, I have with me, I already said your name, but go ahead and introduce yourself again.
Hi, I am that guy already introduced as Scott.
Right.
The artist formerly known as Scott.
Right. And we are smack dab in the middle of season 2 here, and episode 18 of season 2, actually. So maybe a little past the halfway point. But we're talking about an interesting episode today. And Scott, before I read Rod's opening words, let's have you give the plot synopsis.
Sure. Global Airlines Flight 33 is a Boeing 707 en route from London to New York, specifically Idlewild Airport. For those playing the home game, that's Kennedy Airport before Kennedy was a thing. Well, I guess he was a thing. He was president, but not a huge thing yet.
Right.
The captain and the crew notice that the Boeing 707 is moving much faster than it truly should, to the tune of almost double its airspeed. And soon, they also realize that they have broken the sound barrier. They find themselves out of communication and not knowing where they are, but assuming, since they've gone so fast, that they must have already blown past their airport. They then decide to drop down below the clouds to see where they are, and they find Manhattan Island with no buildings and no people. They then continue to fly around New York, going over Albany, Manhattan again, continually circling, burning up their fuel, and still not seeing anything, except for a few dinosaurs here and there. They finally decide that their only hope is to climb back into the clouds and try to find whatever kind of jet stream got their speed up the first time and to go again. And so they do, and they do start picking up speed again. And they are excited to find out that they do make it back to civilization. Unfortunately, that civilization is a few years behind them, as they notice that, one, the radio operator does not know what a jet is or radar is, and two, they see the New York World's Fair, which is from 1939. The episode ends as the Boeing climbs up one final time into the air, hoping that this leap will be their leap home. And unfortunately, that's where the episode ends, not knowing if they will ever make it back to 1961.
And here was what Rod had to say. You're riding on a jet airliner en route from London to New York. You're at 35,000 feet atop an overcast and roughly 55 minutes from Idlewild Airport. But what you've seen occur inside the cockpit of this plane is no reflection on the aircraft or the crew. It's a safe, perfectly designed machine, and the men you've just met are a trained, cool, highly efficient team. The problem is simply that the plane is going too fast, and there is nothing within the realm of knowledge, or at least logic, to explain it. Unbeknownst to passenger and crew, this airplane is heading into an uncharted region well off the beaten track of commercial travelers. It's moving into the Twilight Zone. What you're about to see we call the Odyssey of Flight 33. Kind of rare that Rod actually mentions the name of the episode.
Yeah, it doesn't happen often, and usually he does it for a reason. This time it just kind of is thrown in. Every time I hear Rod saying, "You're riding on a jet airliner," I'm thinking, "I'm leaving on a jet plane." I don't know why.
I never put Rod Serling and John Denver in the same thought before.
But yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. So this is an episode I think is really, really interesting. This is kind of this is one of those episodes that I think is strong suited because it's in a very, very tight location, and you know even though there's a lot of extras as passengers on the plane, it's a very limited cast because it's mainly the cockpit crew that we're dealing with. So Scott, we'll get your first impressions of this episode.
Well, yeah, I love character pieces. I like seeing characters that are stuck in a situation that is beyond their control and beyond their knowledge base. And I also do enjoy that these characters are handled very professionally. And actually, that is going to be a little bit of a weakness down the road for me too. But United used to allow you to tap into the cockpit and listen into the ground crew and the cockpit through their little radio station. That stopped a few years ago, and I have no reason, no knowledge why, except for I bet they probably got tired of people hearing them make odd mistakes and questioning them later on. But I always enjoyed my flights that I took listening into that, because I kind of enjoy the professional discussion that goes on these flights. And it's always interesting how matter-of-factly these guys are. And I like that about this episode, that they were very true to that. And aside from the fear on these guys' faces, which comes from great acting, you don't sense that the flight crew has this is anything out of the ordinary for the flight crew. They just continue to do their job throughout, and I really did appreciate that and liked it.
Yeah, there's a professionalism and an authenticity to this episode. It's not like some TV shows where you're watching a flight and it just seems completely out of the realm of possibility, even though we're dealing with kind of a fantastical happening in this episode. It's dealt with in a very realistic manner. And I think that Captain Farver, played by John Anderson, he's really the grounding of this episode, and everything sort of revolves around his ability to remain calm, cool, and collected. And it's really interesting to watch him as he goes through all the events of this. As I mentioned before, a very sort of tight-knit cast, a very interesting premise, a very closed setting, and the suspense in this episode really builds up. And I think that Serling really brings the plot along at a nice pace, and you really kind of don't know where it's going, which I find very, very, very interesting. I mean, we've seen some air flight episodes before, but I don't think anything quite like this. So it was kind of a refreshing change of pace for me, and I really enjoyed it. Scott, we'll start with you. What works for you best in this episode?
Well, you mentioned John Anderson, who, by the way, is from Quincy, Illinois. I saw that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, born and raised in Quincy. I was just in Quincy a few days ago. No statues to John Anderson. They need to fix that. But when I was watching John Anderson, his voice stands out immensely. He's just got that character voice. And then I realized it was the guy who was Lincoln but not Lincoln from A Passage for Trumpet. He played Gabe. Mm. Yes, the afterlife Lincoln, or whatever the heck he was supposed to be. So that voice stood out to me for that reason too. But as I already mentioned, I did enjoy the professionalism that they showed. I think when we're in the cockpit, it's very interesting to watch them work. And I also, as I mentioned already, really enjoyed watching those actors try to be professional while also showing that fear of the unknown on their faces. Even the captain has a few moments where he allows himself a fleeting look of just terror, but he's always looking forward so his crew doesn't see it on him. And so in doing a little research for this, we noted that a lot of this professionalism comes from the work of Rod's brother, Robert Serling, who actually was an aviation reporter. And he's noted as saying that one of the ways he got the language right for the script was he got one of his buddies who was an airline pilot from Washington over to New York for the weekend, and they basically drained a bottle of bourbon and wrote the script while they were doing it. So they definitely they checked out their source material and did a great job there. Another thing that's really fun for me is this episode, for one reason or another, reminds me of a Stephen King book, The Langoliers. And it's kind of the same idea that a flight is lost out of time. And I'm sure Stephen King borrows his ideas from a lot of different things, so I wouldn't doubt if he borrowed Langoliers from this. And it's a little different in Langoliers. They wind up ahead of time, and then behind time. And when they wind up behind time, they find out that there are some interesting creatures that devour time after it has moved on. So it's definitely a different story, but I got a little bit of a vibe from that. And you gotta love stop motion.
Yeah.
I miss Harryhausen.
Ray Harryhausen.
Ray Harryhausen. See, this is why I keep you around, because you actually know your stuff when I don't. But Jason and the Argonauts and all that good stuff. I love the stop motion cheese, and there is some definite cheese when that long necked dinosaur is waving high.
Yeah, this episode I just really liked it all around. It's not the best Twilight Zone episode we've seen, but I don't think it's by any means I don't think it's by any means an average one. I enjoyed the setup. I enjoyed the cast. I enjoyed, as I mentioned before, the authenticity. There's just something about it that's really interesting, and just the way that all of the facts were set up and all of the years, and how just hearing Idlewild was such an interest. I'm like, I've never heard that as an airport, and I'm like, because that name doesn't exist anymore. But it's a fun episode too, and just an interesting sort of thought, that you can get stuck in this sort of space-time continuum, to use a term, that where you can be sent all the way back to prehistoric era, but if you reach enough speed, you can get transported to 1939 and maybe hopefully another time. I just loved it, and I loved the little bits where every once in a while, where it would cut to the passengers, and they would try and figure out what was going on, and it was just great. And as you said, the stop motion I do miss as well. I think there is I think there's a real innocence about stop motion, and a real sort of fantastical element that we've kind of lost with CGI and all of that. The stop motion just kind of has that nostalgic factor that we all love. But a really, really strong episode for me, just because of these little elements. Anything in particular that doesn't work for you in this episode?
Well, before that, with the stop motion, one little fun aside is that was supposedly, based on the research, the most expensive Twilight Zone scene in the entire history of the show. It cost $2,500 to make that little dinosaur say hi. And the special effects gentleman who worked on it said it was Buck Houghton, or Houghton, one of the two, who worked also on a whole bunch of other shows, including Star Trek and Outer Limits and a whole bunch of other shows. But he said the most expensive piece of film ever shot for Twilight Zone was the dinosaur watching the plane go by. It cost us $2,500, and God, Business Affairs raised hell with me about it. Remember, this is the same time that CBS is saying we should try videotape to see if this can be any cheaper. And and this is actually the last one that was shot before they moved over to videotape. I wonder if that's the reason why.
Maybe.
They're like, hey, we just spent $2,500 on a 2-second shot of a dinosaur.
Well, it paid off, and it just lends itself to the charm of this episode. But another thing before we get to things that didn't work for us, in terms of the plot, I was thinking, okay, so they've left the prehistoric era, they're back in 1939, and I'm like, if you have to be stuck, 1939 is not a bad year. The Depression is over, and and it's a great movie, but you have to live through World War II again.
I'm already saying these guys are pilots in the 60s. Yeah. We probably had to deal with the captain definitely had to already deal with World War II once.
Yeah,
I'm sure he doesn't want to do it again.
I know. I thought about that, and I'm like, okay, that's
how many bombing runs did that guy have to do 15 years earlier that he does not want to do again?
Double the PTSD. And so Scott, what doesn't work for you in this episode?
Not too much. I think this is a well-rounded episode. I think for me, the one that, and this is just me, and I'm sure I will be ridiculed by people listening to this again. It's much like my Invaders thing. Because we are seeing the professionalism and we are seeing the no drama type work of these guys, it actually is a little hard to keep up with for the whole episode. I
Hmm.
would almost want a little bit more drama. I don't think I want somebody freaking out in the passengers play area or whatever, but a little bit to break that. We got to call Idlewild. We got to check the Doppler. We got to do this, this, and this. Break that up a little bit. I think they tried to do that with the flight stewardess, but they were so annoying in the fact that we got hot and heavy dates coming up. I'm like, I don't care. Yeah, you're gonna miss the opera. Damn. So for me, I think if they would have broken that up a little bit, maybe I don't know. I don't even know how I could write this better because it is a good episode. It's just that's the one thing for me that it gets a little bit long in the tooth when we're in the cockpit for too long.
Yeah, I was trying to think about what didn't work for me, and and my feeling was maybe I could have used a little bit more. I thought maybe it was too expensive. They couldn't have stayed in the prehistoric era very long. But I'm like, maybe that they didn't have to cut to a shot of a dinosaur, but we could have seen a little more of the danger that was lurking, and maybe not even like a pterodactyl flying by or something. but, um, but just a little bit more. And you're right, the stewardesses are are a little grating during that part. But I really like the economic structure of the episode, and they don't waste. I mean, well, obviously they splurged on that 5 seconds of film, but they don't splurge on the storytelling. It's kind of nice and tight, and it's all in one location. And I think we've said before, that's what the Twilight Zone does best: a small cast in just a small location, not too much histrionics, not too much special effects or anything. It's Serling showing people taken sort of to the edge of their limits, so to speak. And I think this episode is one of the best examples of that. And anything else you want to add, Scott?
Yeah. What I appreciate about this episode is it leaves us not knowing what happened. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, no. I was just saying I thought of that before we went on the air. I thought it's rare that you get an episode where you're not going to know what's going to happen.
And I joked about the leap home during my intro, and I really like Quantum Leap. And if we ever get through this, I may have to do that next. If we ever get through this, but Quantum Leap, spoilers for a show 25 years old, ends the exact same way. And the fact that we're told that Sam Beckett never returns home, and he continues to move from time to time. And so that definitely harkens back for me when they say that, if you hear a jet plane go overhead, send up a flare because it's Flight 33 trying to find its way home. It's a dark ending, but it's a nice change of pace, because with Twilight Zone, and I'm not a guy who really enjoys dark too much, but with Twilight Zone, a lot of times things get wrapped up in a pinch, and it's like, episode's over. This one just kind of leaves you going, wow, they're gonna be up there, and you have to wonder about fuel. You have to wonder, do they finally have to land and hang out with Triceratopses? You don't know, and it just leaves you kind of like, oh, kind of a gut punch, which I think the episode is helped by.
Yeah, I completely agree. When the episode ended, I'm like, wow, they're sort of leaving us in the air, but in a way, I kind of like that. I kind of like the mythos that Rod created, that this plane is just sort of circling forever, trying to find its way home, and there is kind of there's a suspense and there's a sadness to that, which he doesn't usually leave you with. And I thought that was another interesting button on the episode that you don't usually get, which added to the mystique of it, which the best episodes of the Twilight Zone, Rod gives sort of each its own little identity and mystique to, and that's why I think this episode stands out among some of the others we've seen this season.
It is a literal Flying Dutchman.
Yep. So as we get toward the end here of the episode, Scott, let's try and figure out where we rank this in the Hall of Fame of the Twilight Zone episodes. If you're just joining us, we rank these on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best that the Twilight Zone has to offer, 5 being an average Twilight Zone episode, and 1, as we like to put it, the fever or Bewitching Pool, which I can't necessarily confirm yet, but I will maybe in a year and a half.
I will be very disappointed if you watch that episode early. Don't do it.
I promise I won't. I've made that promise for a year now, and I'm sticking to it.
Save yourself for college. Just save yourself.
I will. I will, and maybe if we remember, we'll do the live viewing of it.
Yeah, I have ideas. I really do. I think it'll be a fun little wrap up to the show if we ever get there.
Oh, that would be fun. So, Scott, where do you rank the Odyssey of Flight 33?
This one's tough for me because I have no real arguments as to why this episode doesn't hold up or isn't one of my best, but it truly, for some reason, it just doesn't ring home to me too much. And I think maybe it's just because, again, I don't know. I mean, when I watch this episode again and again, I always remember the dinosaur. That's so I always forget that they get back to 1939 and then they get stuck in the air. I always just remember the dinosaur. I'm like, okay, here comes the episode where they see the dinosaur out the window. And maybe that's it. Maybe it's just because this episode isn't truly memorable to me enough to where I can remember the really good things about it. So it doesn't stick with me. And I when I score things, it has to really stick with me to score highly. It definitely is an above average episode, The Twilight Zone, but I think it's only a 6 for me.
Yeah, I was thinking about exactly where to put it, but I'm different than you. This episode stayed with me, and this was an episode I hadn't seen before. And I think maybe it's just because in the order that we're watching them in, I guess ask me when we get to the end if this is an episode I remember. It could change. But this is one that stuck with me after it was over, and it's not a perfect episode, so it's not a 10, and I don't think it's even a 9, but I'm going to give it an 8. Because it did stay with me, and I love the economy of it, and I love that they took the risk with the stop motion, and I love that Rod leaves you hanging in the air, and I love the performance of John Anderson. So for me, it is one of the more top tier episodes. So I think an 8 is a fair ranking on my part.
Cool.
So as we conclude this episode of Zone-i-Sodes, anything else we need to add, Scott?
No, I would just say the next episode for me in my head canon is a prequel to Rocky, the movies.
If you say so, yeah, maybe.
I just assume Burgess Meredith is Mickey.
Yeah, okay. And it's the Burgess Meredith factor.
Yeah, I think I just assume it's Mickey, and this is the start of his story.
So this is the prequel. This is the
Mickey the Strong. You got heart, Rock. You got heart. We mentioned
if only we had watched this when we recorded the classics episode of Rocky.
we mentioned a couple weeks ago that that one of my favorite episodes in the season has Burgess Meredith in it. Spoilers, this is not it.
Does it even fall under the Mr. Beavis enjoyment level?
I haven't rewatched it yet. I'll get back to you on that.
All
Stay
right.
tuned for next week.
Well, we'll discuss that. But before I read Rod's closing narration for the episode, Scott, tell people where they can find us.
You can find us at thefrontrowmoviereviews.com. You can also find us on Facebook at The Front Row Movie Reviews and Zone-i-Sodes, both Facebook pages. And if you're listening to us on your podcast app of choice, please be sure to give us a subscription and then also give us a review. Those reviews really help us in terms of search engine results, so help us expand our listenership that way. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe, and also hit that notify button, because we do a lot of live shows, and that notify button will let you know as soon as we go live, so you can join in on the conversation.
And as we conclude this episode, here's what Rod had to say at the very end of the Odyssey of Flight 33. A global jet airliner en route from London to New York on an uneventful afternoon in the year 1961, but now reported overdue and missing. and by now searched for on land, sea, and air by anguished human beings, fearful of what they'll find. But you and I know where she is. You and I know what's happened. So if any moment, you hear the sound of jet engines flying the overcast, engines that sound searching and lost, engines that sound desperate, shoot up a flare or do something, that would be Global 33 trying to get home from the Twilight Zone. So as we end this episode of Zone-i-Sodes, we hope that you will always find us. I am Brandon Davis.
I'm leaving on a jet plane. Don't know when I'll be back again. Oh, babe, I hate to go.
And on that note, we will see you on the couch.